Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Billy in Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Shandor in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Sharon in New Jersey, Belle in Texas, Lorraine in Texas, Camille in Austin, Texas, and Sarah Boker, Israel, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Renee in Indiana, Nancy in North Carolina, Chaim in Florida, Frank in San Pedro, Franco in Trieste, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Great to be with you. Short daf. Let's get to it. Nina, maybe you want to share in the comments just something nice that we could share with you, my holy sisters and brothers. I'm pretty sure that in the history of Chabad, Chabad.org, which is an unbelievable website, resource, reservoir, that, I mean, I use constantly. Like whenever I need to look up something from Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible, you can look at Sepharia. And I would recommend that at the same time you look at Chabad.org, and I usually go to Chabad.org first because the translations are different. The Hebrew is obviously the same in both places, but the translation is different, and every translation is an interpretation. You need both. There are, I mean, literally millions of articles on Chabad.org on every subject of Torah, of Judaism, of Kabbalah, of Jewish wisdom, Jewish history. It's just unbelievable. And of course, there's the thousands and thousands and thousands of Chabad emissaries, shluchim in Hebrew, and shluchot. The rabbis and rebbitzins who are everywhere around the world creating synagogues and bringing Judaism to the people where they are. I mean, I'm sure you've noticed. There. My picture of the Rebbe back there. Nina and I don't consider ourselves Chabad, but our rabbis Chabad. So many of our dear friends are Chabad rabbis. Or Chabadniks, just people who live by Chabad but aren't necessarily rabbis. It's just a very, very important part of our life, important part of our journey. So many rabbis, Chabad rabbis, have helped me, and obviously we made a movie about a Chabad rabbi. Guns N' Moses is about a Chabad rabbi. But one thing that Chabad.org has never done is profile a movie, because the values of most movies are just, well, I mean, if it's coming from Hollywood, it's usually godless and a lot of problems in terms of Jewish values. And so the work of being a Chabad rabbi generally does not involve, writing a piece or reading an article about movies that are out in movie theaters. But that's until now. They wrote, I think it's Moshe New and Sally Reicher, just wrote such an in-depth and beautiful, beautiful article about Guns N' Moses, about Nina and me, about the history of this project, and about Accidental Talmudist, and about our class, and about so much is covered in that article. Rabbi Shlomo Schwartzy, who was so instrumental in our journey, he's mentioned in the article. I mean, it's so beautiful, and I'm so grateful and profoundly moved by it. So you might enjoy that article. And Joseph is saying that on Chabad.org you can turn on and off the Rashi, which is great because, even if your Hebrew is not bad, Rashi's script isn't always so easy. And so Chabad.org makes the Rashi commentary on all of Tanakh just so, right at your fingertips. It's great. It's unlimited. I mean, any Torah portion that you're in, hundreds of articles about that Torah portion. It's such an important part of our lives. So it's really an amazing honor. And I'm so grateful that they wrote an article about us. Nina, if you could put that link in the comments. There it is. That would be great. Okay. Let me see if she shared it, but it's not clickable because it's in her name, not a T. So if I do that, I think it will be clickable. There we go. Okay, let's get to class. Our daf today is page 68. Today, with God's help, I think we're completing our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 5. Okay, right at the top of 68a. Ula. Now remember Ula, our good friend Ula, who's a great sage and who would travel frequently between Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the sages in the community of the Jews, and the learning community and the teaching community in Eretz Yisrael, and the community in Bavel. So he was kind of an expert on what was being said in both places, and would really help clarify when there was some kind of a disagreement between what the sages were saying in Israel and what they were saying in Bavel. Right? They didn't have phones and telegrams and internet, obviously. So somebody who went back and forth and made that very difficult journey with some frequency was a very important character in our general story, so to speak. Ula also was a guy with a strong personality, an edgy sage. Who would not suffer fools very patiently. So let's see what Ula says. Ula says, this dispute between Rabbi Meir... I don't want to cover up the Rebbe since we're talking about him, but I want to make sure that you're hearing me properly. You'd think this would be easy. Okay. By now. Okay. Ula says, the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, and let me know if the audio is not good enough. I'll just, right now I need to be teaching. Okay. Ula says, this dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon is with regard to a forbidden food that enhanced the flavor of a dish when it first fell into it, and subsequently detracted from its flavor. So why are we talking about this, right? So we've seen that anything like the wine of Gentiles that is prohibited because of concerns that it was used as a libation for idolatry. Okay, well, what if some of it, fell into otherwise permitted food? And then as we're analyzing these kinds of questions, we're looking at other kinds of prohibited substances that get mixed into permitted substances, where the prohibition maybe is not as stringent as Avoda Zara, but it might be that something is teruma, permitted only to priests, not to regular Jews, or prohibited because it's tameh, and therefore the priest can't eat it, though a regular Jew could, because it's ritually impure, or because it's something that is just not kosher and prohibited for all Jews. Different kinds of prohibitions. When there's a mixture, what are we going to say about the mixture? One principle that we've generally seen is that if the prohibited substance that falls into the mixture imparts a detrimental flavor, right? It makes the flavor worse of the mixture, then the mixture would be permitted. But if it enhances the flavor, which would mean that we're benefiting from the permitted substance, then the mixture is prohibited. Okay. Ula says, this dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon is with regard to a forbidden food that enhanced the flavor of a dish when it first fell into it and subsequently detracted from its flavor. In this case, Rabbi Meir deems the dish forbidden, since the forbidden food enhanced the flavor at the outset when it fell in. But in a case of forbidden food that detracted from the flavor of the dish at the outset, everyone agrees that it is permitted. Rav Chaga raised an objection to the opinion of Ula from a baraisa. Forbidden wine that fell into lentils, or forbidden vinegar that fell into split beans, renders the food forbidden. And Rabbi Shimon deems them permitted. But here it is a case where the forbidden food detracted from the flavor of the dish at the outset, and the Tanaim disagree. So Ula said, here's edgy Ula, Chaga does not know what the sages say, and yet he raises an objection. Here we are dealing with a case where the vinegar fell into the cold split beans and one subsequently heated them, in which case it becomes like a forbidden food that enhanced the flavor of the mixture and subsequently detracted from it, as vinegar enhances the flavor of cold split beans, and it is consequently forbidden according to Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yochanan says the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon is with regard to a case where the forbidden food detracts from the flavor of the permitted food from the outset, right? So they're making a distinction. Okay, we know that if it enhances the flavor, it's going to be prohibited, but what if at the beginning it detracted, which made it a permitted mixture, and then as this thing warmed up, somehow the chemistry changed and this prohibited food now ends up enhancing the flavor? Do we revise the ruling or do we stand with the original ruling? Right? It's a basic question. Dilemma was raised before the sages. Does Rabbi Yochanan mean that the dispute is with regard to a case where the forbidden food detracts from its flavor from the outset, but if it enhanced at first and subsequently detracted from it, then everyone agrees that it is forbidden? Or perhaps he means that the dispute is both in this case and in that case. And the Gemara comments that dilemma shall stand. Teku. Rav Amram said, is it possible that there is substance to this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, i.e. that there is disagreement with regard to a case where the forbidden food detracts from the flavor of the permitted food from the outset, but it is not taught in the Mishnah? So Rav Amram went out, examined the Mishnah, and he discovered that this dispute is taught in a Mishnah, different one than we've talked about, Orla 2:8. In the case of non-sacred leaven that fell into the dough, and there is enough of it to cause the dough to become leavened. Right? So here when we're talking about non-sacred, we mean that it's for a Yisrael, right, or a Levi for that matter, but not a Kohen. Right? I mean, a Kohen can obviously eat non-sacred dough, but only a Kohen can eat sacred dough. So things that are sacred, which are permitted only to Kohanim, to the priests of the Jews, cannot be eaten by the non-priests. That's what renders it prohibited, not because, of something bad, but rather because of something sacred, something so good, but it's only set aside for the Kohanim. So here we have a case where we're trying to make bread for a Yisrael, right, for a regular Jew. The leaven that is being used to make the dough rise is also non-sacred. It's not teruma. It's not leaven of teruma. But some sacred leavening, right, teruma leavening, is going to get mixed in with it. So are we going to say that since this bread benefited from this teruma leavening, right, set aside for priests only, therefore now the whole bread can only be eaten by priests and regular Jews cannot eat it? Or since there was enough leavening in this dough for the bread to rise without the added leavening that was of teruma, perhaps the bread should remain permitted for a Yisrael. Right? In the case of non-sacred leaven that fell into the dough and there is enough of it to cause the dough to become leavened, and the dough indeed became leavened, and subsequently leaven of teruma or leaven of forbidden kilayim, diverse kinds planted in a vineyard, fell into this dough. and there is enough of it to cause the dough to become leavened. Then the dough is forbidden because the forbidden leaven is considered to have contributed to the process of the leavening. But Rabbi Shimon deems the dough permitted because the additional leaven actually has a negative impact on the dough, which was already leavened. We don't need additional leaven. And I think any baker can tell you, there's exact proportions that we want for bread to be optimized. And if you put too much or too little of anything, it's not going to be as good. So Rav Amram comments, but here it is a case where the forbidden substance detracted from the flavor of the dough at the outset, and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon disagree, as a Mishnah that is not attributed explicitly to a Tana represents the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Not always, but generally. Rabbi Zara said dough is different because even if the additional leaven is detrimental to its flavor, in any event, the dough is enhanced since it is suitable for leavening several other batches of dough with it. The more it is leavened, the more it is enhanced in terms of this purpose. If you have extra leavening in this dough, it might not make it better, it might make it worse when you bake that dough into bread. But like sourdough, right, if you keep some of this dough unbaked and you just keep mixing it with new dough, where this old dough that has leavening in it then becomes the leavening agent of the new dough that doesn't have leavening in it, then the more leavening that's in it, the more efficient the dough for this purpose is going to be. For this purpose. Right. Now, the Gemara suggests another source for the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Come in here that which is taught in a baraisa. In the case of leaven of teruma and non-sacred leaven that fell into the dough, if this one was sufficient to cause the dough to become leavened, and that one was sufficient to cause the dough to become leavened, and they both cause the dough to become leavened, then it is forbidden. Rabbi Shimon deems it permitted. If the leaven of teruma fell in first, everyone agrees that it is forbidden. If non-sacred leaven fell in first and subsequently the leaven of teruma or diverse kinds that were planted in a vineyard, kilayim, fell in, this is also forbidden. But Rabbi Shimon would deem it permitted because it was already on its way to becoming bread at the outset and the forbidden substance did not enhance and may have detracted. Good enough for Rabbi Shimon to permit it, but the other sages prohibit. The Gemara comments, but here it is a case where the forbidden substance detracted from the flavor of the dough from the outset, and yet they still disagree. And if you would say here too, now on page 68b, this can be explained in accordance with the explanation of Rabbi Zera that dough is different because it enhanced in any event, come in here a refutation of that explanation from the latter clause of the same baraisa. Forbidden wine that fell into lentils or forbidden vinegar that fell into split beans renders the food forbidden, and Rabbi Shimon deems them permitted. And here also it is a case where the forbidden substance detracted from the flavor of the dough from the outset, and yet they disagree. Can't take it. Forgive me, the sound gets not so good, but it's too hot in here. And if you would say, here too it can be explained as Ula responded to Rabbi Chaga, that the Baraisa is referring to a case where the vinegar enhanced the flavor of the split beans and subsequently detracted from it. For example, where it spilled into cold split beans and then they were heated. Well, this cannot be said as, do they actually agree in a case where the forbidden substance enhanced the flavor of the permitted food and then subsequently detracted from it? But isn't it taught in the first clause of the Baraisa that if the leaven of teruma fell in first, before the non-sacred leaven, everyone agrees that it renders the dough forbidden, as it enhanced the flavor of the dough at the outset, right? Became the leavening agent that was going to cause it to rise. That's a big positive. Even though the flavor was subsequently detracted from by the non-sacred leaven. So rather, must one not conclude from it that the dispute is with regard to a case where the forbidden substance detracted from the flavor of the food from the outset? And the Gemara confirms, right, conclude from it that this is so. So the Gemara asks, with regard to those three clauses that the Baraisa teaches concerning different cases, why do I need all of them? Aren't they all teaching the same lesson? Granted, the last clause concerning the wine spilling into the lentils teaches us that the dispute is with regard to a case where the forbidden substance detracts from the flavor of the food from the outset. The middle clause with regard to the case where the leaven of teruma fell in first also teaches a novel law, which is that in the case of a forbidden substance that enhanced the flavor of the food at the beginning and then subsequently detracted from it because the temperature changed, everyone agrees that the mixture is forbidden. But why do I need the first clause concerning the case of non-sacred leaven and leaven of teruma falling into the dough together? It could have been inferred from the other two clauses that the dough is forbidden in the following manner. Now that, in the case of the last clause, where the forbidden substance does not enhance the permitted food at all, the rabbis still deem it forbidden. Is it necessary to say that it is forbidden in the first clause, where the forbidden substance enhances the food flavor at first before detracting from it, since it is half of the leavening agent? So Abaye said the first clause is necessary to teach that Rabbi Shimon deems it permitted. And this is what the rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon. This dough was fit to become leavened in 2 hours if the permitted leaven had fallen into it by itself. What caused it to become leavened in 1 hour? The forbidden leaven that was added to it, because we doubled the amount of leaven in the dough, in the mix, because the prohibited substance was extra leavening. Therefore, it contributed. Rabbi Shimon could respond that when the two types of leaven enhanced the flavor of the dough, they both enhanced it, not only the forbidden leaven, and when they subsequently detracted from it, they both detracted from it. Therefore, it should be permitted. And the Gemara asks, but even according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, let the permitted leaven and the forbidden leaven combine together and render the dough forbidden, since Rabbi Shimon concedes that if the permitted food was initially enhanced by the forbidden substance, it is forbidden. Why do you think he would argue that when there's a half and half, it would be permitted? So the Gemara responds that Rabbi Shimon conforms to his standard line of reasoning as he says, that even a forbidden substance and another forbidden substance do not combine to render a mixture forbidden. Accordingly, a forbidden substance and a permitted substance certainly do not, if we're talking about minimum measure, to render forbidden. And the Gemara comments, this is as we learned in a Mishna in Mila 18a. If orla and diverse kinds planted in a vineyard fell into a permitted substance and neither one is sufficient in its own quantity to render the mixture forbidden, they combine to render it forbidden if together they are of a sufficient quantity. But Rabbi Shimon says they do not combine, and each forbidden substance is treated individually. Either there's enough of it to satisfy the minimum measure that would render the mixture prohibited, or there's not. We don't combine the two prohibited substances, according to Rabbi Shimon. New subject. The Gemara recounts an incident. Let's get to a story. A certain mouse that fell into a barrel of beer. Who's drinking the beer from the barrel of beer that a mouse fell into it? Me either. Rav deemed that barrel of beer forbidden. The sages said before Rav Sheshes, shall we say that Rav maintains that even in a case where the forbidden substance imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, it is forbidden? Presumably the mouse imparted flavor to the detriment of the beer. So what are we talking about here? Now we're not talking about forbidden because it's used in Avoda Zara. We're not talking about forbidden because it's set aside, something sacred that only priests can eat. Now we're talking about a sheretz, right? A dead, creeping thing that falls into a food. Now, the dead creeping thing is not a kosher animal, so we can't eat it because it's not kosher. It's also a dead creeping thing that imparts tumah, ritual impurity. The fact that a food is tameh does not disqualify it from being eaten unless it's teruma and a priest is going to be eating it. He can't eat something that is tameh, and a sheretz will render food tameh. But a regular Jew can eat food that is chulin, which is non-sacred food, that becomes tameh. That's okay. So here we're talking about the aspect of the animal that is not kosher. You can't eat it because it's not kosher and has fallen into food. It could render other types of things impure also that wouldn't necessarily be food. Like if you touch a sheretz, then you are impure and you'll have to become purified, immersed in the mikveh, wait for nightfall before you could enter the holy temple, for example. Okay, but here we're talking about the non-kosher aspect of the animal. So it's a barrel of beer. Now, a barrel of beer is not necessarily like an oil barrel the way we think of, I don't know how many gallons are in an oil barrel, like when we think of barrels. Must be a lot, right? 100 gallons, 200 gallons? I don't know. But a barrel in Talmudic times is a lot smaller. It's more like, something like this. But still, right? A mouse can be very, very tiny. It's falling into something that has alcohol in it. So truthfully, it's probably not going to change the taste of the barrel of beer at all. It's not going to add to it. If you're tasting anything, it would not be a positive addition. But that's not the only factor that's going on here, right? Because even if it wasn't going to render food tameh, even if it wasn't kosher, it's repulsive. None of us wants to eat a dead mouse that, or the trace of dead mouse that fell into our beer. We are naturally repulsed by that. And that's a very important part of this discussion. Here we go. Right, so here the question is, since our whole principle has been that if something that's prohibited, this is prohibited for consumption, only detracts from the flavor of the mixture would be permitted. So this is not, it is obviously detrimental to the taste of the barrel of beer, so even though it fell in, we should still be permitted to drink the beer. Are we? Rav Sheshes said to them, Rav generally maintains that in a case where the forbidden substance imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is permitted. But here, in the case of a mouse, it is a novelty that the Torah prohibits the flavor from a mouse at all, as it is repulsive, and people distance themselves from consuming it. And even so, the merciful one prohibits it, right? In other words, none of us want to eat a mouse. Why? And in fact, it's this week's Torah portion. Why in Parsha Re'eh, which we're reading this week, does it say that a mouse specifically is a prohibited creeping thing that imparts tumah and that we are prohibited from eating? It's actually mentioned. Somebody can look that up. I'm pretty sure it's definitely imparts tumah. But I think it just says it is an impure thing, that there's a list of what we're permitted to eat, not permitted to eat. The birds that are permitted, the birds that are prohibited. The mammal that has a split hoof and chooses cud, right, like a cow, and to the exclusion of a pig, etc. There's a whole list of what we can and cannot eat. The mouse is included as something we cannot eat. If you ever seen a typical person get totally freaked out when they see a mouse, it's like no one is really interested in eating that mouse. So why is the Torah going out of its way to prohibit for consumption something that we would be repulsed by eating anyway? It must be to teach us something more than we're simply prohibited to eat the mouse. And what is that? That we can't even eat a mixture where there's, a mouse fell in, and even though it doesn't change the flavor for the better, we can't drink that mixture. That's what he's saying here. Therefore, although it imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, it is still a forbidden mixture. The sages said to Rav Sheshes, if that is so, that the law with regard to a mouse is considered a novelty and is therefore understood to be more stringent than the norm, then a dead mouse should impart ritual impurity, whether it is moist or dried out. So why do we learn in a Mishna, Tractate Nida, page 54b, that carcasses of creeping animals, sheretzim, impart impurity when they are moist, but do not impart impurity, tumah, ritual impurity, when they are dried out? Once they're desiccated, they no longer have that power to impart tumah. If you're saying that they need to be handled so stringently, why wouldn't we say that if you come into contact with it, whether it's recently dead or dead for centuries, it would still impart the same tumah? Rav Sheshes responded, and according to your reasoning in which you compare the laws of tumah to prohibited foods, right, not kosher foods, then with regard to semen, which is also repulsive, it should impart impurity, whether moist or dried out. So why do we learn in a Mishna in Tractate Nida 54b that semen imparts impurity when it is moist, but it does not impart impurity when it is dried out? It no longer has that power to transmit tumah. So rather, what have you to say? With regard to the tumah of semen, the merciful one states the flow of seed, right? That's the way that semen is referred to in Leviticus 15:16, meaning that the reference is to semen that is fit to fertilize, right? It's still active, so to speak, fresh. Here too, with regard to the ritual impurity of a mouse, the verse states when they have died in Leviticus 11:32. So the merciful one is telling us that the carcasses of creeping animals impart impurity only when they are similar to their state at the time of their death, i.e. when they are still moist. Therefore, there is no contradiction to the claim that the prohibition against eating a mouse is a novelty and consequently applies even when it detracted from the flavor of the food into which it fell. Rav Shimi of Nehardea objects to the assumption that a mouse is repulsive. You might have been thinking the same thing. Maybe you're thinking, well, I find it repulsive, you find it repulsive, but maybe there are people out there, cultures, that like mice, and they don't find it repulsive. But isn't it served at the table of kings and considered a delicacy? Obviously not for Jews, not kosher, we don't eat it, but maybe there are actual kings of other cultures that do like to eat mice. So Rav Shimi of Nehardea said in clarification, this is not difficult, la kasha. This statement that a mouse is served as a delicacy is stated with regard to a field mouse. And that statement that it is repulsive is stated with regard to a city mouse. Rava said, the law is that if the forbidden substance imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture is permitted. But with regard to a mouse that fell into a barrel of beer, I do not know what the reason was that Rav deemed it forbidden. I do not know whether it was because he maintains that if the forbidden substance imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, it is forbidden, and if so, the law is not in accordance with his opinion, or whether it was because although he maintains that if the forbidden substance imparts flavor to the detriment of the mixture, it is permitted, nevertheless, a mouse that falls into beer does enhance its flavor, and that's why he's prohibiting it. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Now we're on top of page 69a. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Bum bum ba da 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 ba ba bum. Okay. A dilemma was raised before the sages. If a mouse fell into vinegar, then what is the law? Does it enhance its flavor? Rav Hillel said to Rav Ashi, there was such an incident in the study hall of Rav Kahana. And Rav Kahana deemed the vinegar forbidden. Right? Usually we've been talking about vinegar in the context of made from the wine of Gentiles, and that's why it's prohibited. Here we're talking about vinegar made from kosher wine. So that's permitted. But if a mouse falls into it, then what? Right? So Rav Kahana said, forbidden. No way. This is not a proof. That mouse was dismembered. And Rav Kahana deemed the vinegar forbidden due to concern that one might consume a substantive piece of the mouse in the vinegar, which is prohibited regardless of the taste. You can't eat a non-kosher animal, right? If the mouse was whole and it was in the vinegar and then you took it out, right, you're not eating any part of the mouse. The question is, did the fact that it was in there for a little while impart some kind of flavor? So we can't learn from the incident with Rav Kahana because there were pieces of mouse in the vinegar. The Gemara relates that Ravina thought that the quantity of vinegar necessary for nullifying the flavor of the mouse should be calculated at 101 times the volume of the mouse. He said it should not be He said it should not be rendered worse, i.e. more stringent, than teruma, which is nullified by 101 times its volume in a mixture. And this is, as we learned in a Mishna, tractate Terumah 4:7, that Terumah is nullified in a mixture by 101 times its volume of permitted food. Right? So if some Terumah fell into a mixture, that would render the whole mixture prohibited, unless it was such a small amount of Terumah that the rest of the permitted substance is more than 101 times the volume of the Terumah. Then the Terumah would be nullified and would not disqualify the mixture. Rav Tachlifa Bar Giza said to Ravina, well, perhaps this case is similar to spice of Terumah in a pot, whose flavor is not nullified even by 101 times its volume of permitted food, as the flavor imparted by a spice is exceptionally strong. If you ever had a ghost pepper, tiniest little bit will change a whole pot, the flavor of a whole pot of stew. So you can't say it's nullified, even though the volume is 1,000 times the volume of the tiny bit of pepper, because it has a flavor that is so strong. So we would not nullify it. Rav Achai calculated the amount of vinegar necessary to nullify the flavor of the mouse at 50 times its volume, vinegar to mouse. Although forbidden food in a mixture usually requires the presence of 60 times its volume of permitted food to be nullified, vinegar has a sharp enough flavor that it nullifies the mouse with less. Here it's the larger part that has the strong flavor, the vinegar. Rav Shmuel, the son of Rav Ika, calculated the amount of beer necessary for nullifying the mouse at 60 times the volume of the mouse. And the Gemara concludes, and the law is that this and that, both vinegar and beer, nullify the mouse with 60 times its volume, and so is the ruling for all prohibitions in the Torah. That's generally speaking that number 60 times, where there's a possibility to nullify something prohibited that fell into a larger mixture. If it's possible to nullify it, almost always the number that's required is 60 to 1. And we see that number in other places. Some beautiful sayings of the sages in Tractate Brachas, that a dream is 1/60th of prophecy, Shabbos is 1/60th of Olam Haba, of the world to come. Now, forgetting the other ones right now. Okay, just a couple of comments. Bill says, stuffed dormice were an extremely popular hors d'oeuvre in Roman cuisine. There you go. The table of kings in their culture, since they were surrounded by Rome. Thank you. And Joe says, still popular in Croatia. Who knew? Thank you so much, Joe. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at our regular Friday time, noon Pacific. All the best. Have a great night.